Greetings and welcome. I'm so happy to have the opportunity to participate in this conference, and I'm so thankful that you're here, and I want to thank the conference organizers. So welcome to the From Sensory Overload to Calm presentation, and this is a presentation about some very special movements called innate reflexes and rhythmic movements. I'll explain what they are, what they do, and why they're important. All right, so I have been teaching neurodevelopmental movement for about 12 years now to a number of professionals, and it's been a fantastic journey because these movements are so vital for our health, our well-being, our development, and they're particularly good for children with challenges, especially challenges like autism, sensory processing challenges, and that kind of thing. So I want to say hi. I'm going to take myself off camera because we'll get a better recording that way. And before I go off camera, I'm just going to show one thing, which is an infant reflex that I trust that you're already familiar with. So if I have an infant's hand and I put my finger in the hand, we'll see a little baby curl the fingers around and make a grasping motion. This is called the grasp reflex, and it's an important part of our development, as are many, many other infant reflexes. All right, so that will come up later when we talk about these infant primitive reflexes, and I will explain that as we go. And for now, I'm going to take myself off camera, and we're just going to focus on the slides. So this slide is just to let you know that there is a course that you can take to learn these movements, and I have been blessed to be able to present this course. I learned about the importance of neurodevelopmental movements and how to do them, and I had some of the best mentors in the world, and I took the finest tools and combinations of things that I learned, not only from my mentors, but from children and families and many practitioners, and from my own experience. And I put it together in this Brain and Sensory Foundation's curriculum. So this is available, and now we get to share it worldwide. We have this program being used in over 26 countries, and I'm very happy with how the results are. We have case studies that are on the website at moveplaythrive.com. And you'll see the phenomenal results we're getting. In fact, I've had many OTs and PETs, that's occupational therapists and physical therapists, tell me that these movements are the finest thing that they've found for helping with sensory processing issues. I've had OTs tell me they get results in 2 months that they used to be happy to see in a year. One said she's helping children succeed like never before. Another physical therapist said that if she only had one tool for her toolbox of all the things she's learned, it would be reflex integration that she would keep. So that shows you some of the power of these movements. And another thing is I will be sharing some case studies like this one. So Bethany made huge progress with sensory speech and learning. So her mom sent me this photo and allowed me to use it. And the reason it's so exciting is that Bethany would not eat an apple. She wouldn't bite into an apple before, or really any other kinds of food. And her mom says it was impossible or near impossible to get Bethany to bite into something without first cutting it into small pieces. She was also reluctant to wear clothing and mostly nonverbal. Bethany is now eating well, wearing clothes, and her speech is improving daily. So her mom said she was amazed and that the movements have clicked, and we are seeing good results that remain over time. So this is a very hopeful trend, is that we're seeing over and over that with consistency, there are positive results with these movements. And it actually makes sense because these are the movements that develop our brain, body, and sensory system in the first place when we're infants. And they are innate, meaning that every human being has like a program or a template in the brain for doing these movements. They are like our inborn exercise system that matures the brain and body. And every baby will do these movements as long as they are not stressed, as long as they're healthy, and as long as they have room to move, and as long as they're placed on their bellies. So many children, however, are stressed. They've had interference in the womb. They've had exposure to toxins in early infancy or in the womb. And so what's happening is they're not getting these required movements. So when the baby does get this system of movements, they can adapt to gravity. They'll be able to roll, crawl, stand, walk, and run. Their sensory processing will be developed well, as will their brain maturity. They will be able to speak and learn with ease and have upright posture, strength, and stamina, and they will develop further in the brain the higher level emotional and cognitive skills. All right, so the neurodevelopmental movements are essential for proper development, and they're also a hidden key for resolving anxiety, learning, speech, and sensory challenges. So they're like food for the brain and the body and the sensory systems, and it's food that most children are starving for. They haven't gotten enough in their early infancy, or there's been stress or illness or injury in early infancy that causes them to not get enough of these movements. So here's what it looks like when babies don't get enough of these movements. They do not have proper alignment, and posture is one more obvious way that it looks. But what's not so obvious is that the babies on the top row will have much better brain and sensory maturity established. And that is a result of doing these movements. So you can see the babies on the top are well aligned, they are relaxed and upright, and they're ready to explore their environment. However, the babies on the bottom, and this is happening to far too many children in our modern world, unfortunately, but they're going to have a much harder time to explore their environment for many reasons. So for one thing, when they're slumped over like that and slouched, they don't get enough oxygen when they breathe. They also have stress to their internal organs, which don't have enough room. And there's obvious stress points in the spine. And they're just not going to be as active and aware and capable and strong to explore their environment. But it's the exploring of the environment as well as these movements that establish our brain and sensory maturity. So that's the problem. So continuing on here, I want to just share one of the reasons why these movements work and another case study here. So one of the main reasons why these movements work so well is they calm the neurosensory and motor system. So they can actually turn off our fight, flight, and freeze response. These are necessary responses that are active in early womb life and infancy, but they're not meant to stay active. It's meant that the baby feels safe and less vulnerable by about the age of 2 to 4 months. So safety is one of the first steps that a baby will establish in terms of their nervous system. And it's also one of the first steps to heal sensory processing issues. And one of the beautiful things about this innate system of movements is that they all work together for developing a human being that can express joy and play and love and connection and have all the learning capability in place, as well as feeling comfortable and safe inside their own bodies. One of the things we do with this program is we honor the child's pace. It's not something that is a pre-prescribed recipe for every child. And you're taught when you go through the course how to do this and what to look for. And so it is very individualized. All right. So I mentioned I wanted to share a case study. So this is a case study about an 8-year-old boy who was attending a special school for emotionally and behaviorally challenged children. He could not attend regular public education. And the occupational therapist here who sent me this said when he gets frustrated at school, it typically results in a major meltdown with hitting, throwing desks and chairs and yelling. He's had 4 to 5 adults hold him down on the floor at times. And so what she says is after 6 weeks of using these innate rhythmic movements, they were so calming and maturing for this boy that he has not had hardly any behavioral or emotional outbursts like I described since he started doing the rhythmic movements. She said he's already made great gains with balance, coordination, sensory processing, impulse control, and frustration tolerance, and it's only been 6 weeks. These also help tremendously with sleep issues. This mother sent me this comment about her daughter who didn't sleep well for months and maybe even a year. And she finally slept through the first night without waking up after they started the rhythmic movements. Okay, so back to what happens in normal development. So the first 2 years of life are crucial for the formation of growing many nerves. But the key here is that the process does not happen by itself. The brain needs stimulation for it to grow. And the stimulation that a baby receives in the first month of life, because of these automatic movements, is critically important. Here's just a basic brain development scientific article about this. There are many things in this article, but I'm highlighting just a couple here because this shows that the development of normal brain organization requires input via all major sensory systems. So when specific sensory input is lacking, and of course, when you do movements that provide so much sensory input, the alternative patterns of brain organization emerge. So they're saying that the child's early experience plays an essential role in normal development. And when that experience is lacking, they do develop differently. Well, one of the things that's so important for parents to know is that no matter what age your child is, even if your child is already an adult, or even if you're already an adult, I actually started this work in my 40s. These movements, because the brain recognizes them, it knows what to do with them, and they're highly helpful for all ages. You don't have to just do this with infants, even though that's where they come from naturally in the human lifespan. They will work at any age, and we've seen that over and over. So the reason why these movements aren't doing their job is because they're not able to for so many children, and that's because these movements have been hindered either in the womb, at birth, and in infancy. And it's usually because of illness or toxicity, injury, trauma. And if you get really sick and have exhaustion, at any age, these movements can come back because they're supposed to be dormant. But you can do the movements to help them go back into dormancy. I'll explain that in just a minute. So the important thing to know too is that sensory and motor issues are connected, and they are both a core characteristic of autism spectrum disorder. And I want to play a video for you now. I'm going to pop it up on my screen, and you can see it's just 40 seconds. And it's fairly self-explanatory, except that, actually, let me go back to my slides. I want to explain something first. So there are these movements of infancy, and one category are the innate rhythmic movements, which are very calming. And the other category are the primitive reflexes. And there's a third category too, which are developmental movements. And they all intertwine, they all work together. The primitive reflexes are innate automatic movement patterns in response to a specific stimulus. So remember when I showed you my hand and I pressed my finger in the hand and showed what a baby would do, which is to grasp the finger? That's one example of a primitive reflex. And these movements are so important because they help with our survival, protection, sensory integration, brain growth, and development. And what these movements are supposed to do in normal development is they're supposed to emerge, repeat over and over again until their jobs are complete, and they have many jobs. And then they become dormant, or they get, once the brain matures more, they're inhibited by the higher brain centers. And that means they're no longer triggered by the initial stimulus. So for an example, if we had a baby who was developing well and got plenty of movement, and especially these innate movements, you could go up to that baby after, say, 9 to 12 months, and you could press your finger into their hand, and you wouldn't automatically see the grasp response. It would be a different response. It would be a more mature hand that had the brain pathways developed from the hand and the brain to the hand. And now the baby can do more specialized things like a pincher grasp or pincer grasp. So that's a little basic idea of how they work. Now, I'd like to pop this video up here. And what I'm going to show you is a stimulus that I'm going to give a girl on her back. She's about 9 years old. And this stimulus should not elicit any movement. It should be that this stimulus, the response to it is dormant, and that indicates more brain maturity. But what you're going to see is you're going to see a lot of movement in response to the stimulus, and then you're going to see what happens after we do some reflex integration. And you're going to see that she's calm now with the stimulus, which is this is giving you a key point of this whole presentation, which is that these reflex integration movements are an enormous key to sensory integration. So here's the video. All right, so this is the one where we're trying to get the tickle out of the middle of your back. So here comes the stroke. Okay, I totally understand that's uncomfortable. Now, here's what we have to do. Okay, very good. So another case study here, which this occupational therapist sent me this. The mom sent this picture in. This is the actual picture of the boy with the vacuum cleaner. So this boy was very afraid to get his hair cut because they used the electric, we call it a buzz cutter, on his head. He was very afraid of that. He was very afraid of noises. And he was very afraid of the vacuum cleaner. So within about a month of doing rhythmic movement, this boy, his name is Finn, was able to tolerate the buzz cutter on his entire head, but he was still afraid of the vacuum cleaner. His mom continued with the rhythmic movement over the summer, and then they added integration for the fear paralysis and moral reflexes. These are two primitive reflexes that are very important for our emotional stability and our overall health for our entire life. So she said, now look, Finn is the one vacuuming. Also, Finn was completely dependent in dressing. Now he can dress himself apart from some closures. When we started, Finn was unable to isolate finger movements and held his pencil in a dagger grasp. Now he can touch each fingertip to his thumb and he holds his pencil in a good tripod grasp. But that's not all. Listen to this. This is so important. In January, he could sit in a circle time about 30 seconds before he began throwing things and crawling over the other children. He can now usually participate meaningfully in group activities for 30 to 40 minutes, taking turns, following instructions, and respecting other children's space. And this is as a result of movement, because movement matures the brain, the body, and the sensory system, and it also takes us out of the fight or flight and freeze response. So this is showing you some of the possibilities here. Now, I mentioned that these reflexes have jobs, and the reflexes together with the rhythmic movements and the developmental movements, which are the three categories of neurodevelopmental movement, here's what they do. They develop the brain and nervous system and the senses. They help with our balance and posture, as you've already seen in the baby picture. They help our muscle tone, our muscle strength, and our stamina. They're incredibly important for our voluntary movement and also our motivation, our emotional and social skills, and speech and learning skills. All right, so here is a picture that shows what it's like when a child is experiencing unintegrated reflexes. So unintegrated reflexes go hand in hand with sensory processing disorders. If there is a sensory processing disorder, you know that there's also some types of motor or reflex disorder as well. There's never been an exception to that I know of. I could be wrong, but as far as I know of, there's not an exception. Body parts do not move independently. So this means that there's so much more effort needed to do things because the body parts are tied together by the reflex. There can be anxiety and frustration. So remember, these reflexes, as important as they are in infancy, they're supposed to be dormant after they've gotten enough use and maturity. So if they're not dormant, there can be muscle aches, tension, and fatigue, and a lack of a solid neurosensory, motor, and vestibular foundation, which ends up preventing the brain from continuing on in its maturity. So there is research about this. So retained primitive reflexes in children with ADHD and autism spectrum disorders, they were checked in an inpatient psychiatric setting, and 90.3% of the sample had at least one retained reflex present. Now, a retained reflex is the same as an unintegrated reflex, and basically it means one that has not gone dormant, has not reached its full level of maturity. Okay, here's another piece of research that came out in 2014. Motor deficits in children with autism spectrum disorder. They showed that they're linked to specific language and social impairment. So when we correct the motor deficits, it helps hugely with language and social functioning. I really encourage you to go up onto my website. It's moveplaythrive.com. There's a whole section on case studies, and you can read and be very inspired by what's there. There's so much hope and so much progress that we can help our children with if we only give their brain and body the tools that they need to mature more. Okay, so here's another example of a boy that was helped with speech. And after 4 months of rhythmic movement, at the age of 6, he had been nonverbal with only moaning. But after the 4 months, he began saying clearly things like, "May I please go to the bathroom?" And I heard that with my own ears, and I saw this child's progress with my own eyes. And I just really encourage you to look into this and make it a part of your daily routine for your child, no matter what age. Another great new book that's out is called Autism, the Movement Sensing Perspective. And one of the main ideas of this book, it's a book that is, it's actually a wonderful combination of research studies and accounts by parents and other professionals. But what they're saying is that the therapeutic interventions that we give for children with autism ideally should build on core principles of neurodevelopment. And that's exactly what we're doing here. We've got the core principles of neurodevelopment in use here because we are using the very movements that the brain and the body would naturally use, the innate movements, to help our children develop. Let me just, I'd like to skip ahead here on my slides because I only have 30 minutes. So I'm going to skip ahead to, here's some more supporting research, which is talking about movement disturbances in infants can be interpreted as reflexes gone astray and may be early indicators for a diagnosis of autism. But let me show you some really nice before and after pictures here. So neurodevelopmental movement calms, organizes, and matures brain and sensory systems. Here's a living example. This is a writing sample on the left before movement and a writing sample after 10 minutes of integrated movement. Here's another example. This is a drawing on the left that you see before starting Ohana, which is a movement-based special education, movement and nutrition-based special education program. And this is her drawing on the right. And you can see so much more coherence, so much more maturity. And that was after 3 months of daily integrated movement. And what they did for the most of that time was they added the rhythmic movements into this child's routine. Here's another picture. This is astounding because the picture on the left was drawn by a 5-year-old boy, and the picture on the right is a drawing by the same 5-year-old boy, and the time span in between these two drawings was 10 minutes, and in between, in that 10 minutes, the mother of this boy, Kyle, who's a physical therapist, she gave him these rhythmic movements. So you can see so much more content, color, expression, body parts are more proportional. And this was after only 10 minutes of movement. So these movements are profound. And I'm just going to take the last 2 minutes that I have to tell you a little bit more of why they're working. So one of the reasons why they work is that they stimulate the reticular activating system in the brain. And that is a part of the brainstem that has pathways that go directly up to the front part of the brain. So it literally wakes up the brain and gets it ready to receive sensory information. And once the reticular activating system sends that information up, then the brain can do so much more with it. And our children can focus and be alert and have attention. And you know that joint attention is so important for learning. Well, we have to give our children the tools to mature their brains so that they can actually do that. Okay, the cerebellum is pictured on the right side, and this is so important for our speech and for our eye movements and for our voluntary movements, and also the cerebellum, when it's mature, it has direct links and connectivity up to the speech centers and the eye movement centers. So that's why when we give these rhythmic movements, we see so many children improve with speech. So a little summary slide here is the movements not only help with development, but they also decrease stress, which increases learning. And we know that movement in general stimulates brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which means the brain is literally growing in response to movement. This is a little slide about why this works, but we've kind of already covered that. Yeah, we've already covered that. So one last couple of slides here. This is where you can learn more information. I have a Facebook page that I post regularly. My website, I've already shared that with you. Please go and read the case studies and see. There's lots of videos up there too that you can see. And anyone who is wanting to enroll in the Brain and Sensory Foundations course who is attending this conference can put in the discount code KC30 and you get $30 off the tuition, and that is good until the end of January. Well, I thank you so much for your participation. Thank you for listening. Thank you for all the work that you've done for your children and for helping the world be a more peaceful and productive place. I know that these children that we are blessed with and humbled to be able to serve will benefit greatly from these movements. And I trust that you'll see good results if you use them consistently. I am available there at email if you have any questions, Sonia@moveplaythrive.com. And I wish you all many blessings and greetings. Goodbye for now.